Okay, it looks like transcription and recording have both started. So thank you all for taking the time to join us today. Looking forward to hearing from Dave Cantor today. If you haven't seen his previous presentations, they are A+, and you can check those out at in Teams under XE Global via PS Next in the files category. There's all the recordings from previous sessions. But without further ado, Dave, thanks again. Take it away.
Everyone, my name is Dave. I'm here to talk. I'm just checking. You can all hear me and see the slides and everything. Yes?
I can see it. Yes.
Excellent. So this talk today is what is desire and what makes us click. It's going to be a little bit of an alternative talk. It's not going to be on a technical subject. It's something that I want us to think about as developers, because at the end of the day, we're all driving that click. And I think that we don't really think about that. Like at the end of the day, we're trying to motivate the user to action. And what is it we have to do to get them to do that? I know that generally speaking, when these XT meetings happen, that they're real chatty and that people put a lot of comments in the chat room and they talk so I want this to be that kind of presentation. I want people to speak up. Raise your hands, type stuff in the chat. If you're really feeling brave, you can turn your mic on and interrupt the whole thing. But, this should be kind of seen as a two-way street. This should not be seen as me just lecturing. So if you have comments or I say something and you're like, hey, wait a minute, I don't think that's right or anything like that, please, please, please feel free to stop me, raise your hand, throw a comment in the chat. Dave's full of crap, whatever. But I will be looking at chat. I will be responding to comments. So hopefully we can have that kind of conversation. So as we've already discussed, yep, I'm Dave. I started my career, I'm a senior developer here at Publicis Sapient. I've been here for coming up on 3 years. Renee, I see your comment. You might regret this. And that is exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. So keep those comments coming. I started my career, actually, I moved to New York City to write the Great American Novel. I grew up in Chicago, went to college in Boston, and then moved to New York City to write the Great American Novel. I got to New York City and found out that everybody was there to write the Great American Novel and that I really wasn't as interesting as I thought I was. So I began my career actually as a print designer. I moved from writing into print design. I was always really fascinated with books and how they made me feel and how they felt in my hands. So briefly had like a cup of coffee as a print designer and then found out this cool thing called HTML, slipped into digital design where I worked for a few years designing not really like website experiences. From there, I fell more in love with coding than design. And so I quickly became a developer. I've more or less been a developer ever since. At one point, I owned a studio in New York City. It was called Cantor Ross New Media. You can look it up on the Wayback Machine. It was definitely existed. We got wiped out during the dot-com crash, and I was offered a spot at the Parsons School of Design as a member. I had been teaching at the Parsons School of Design. I was teaching programming for art students. The idea was if you go to Yale, if you go to the Yale MFA, it was an MFA program. If you go to the Yale MFA, they teach you how to mix paint. So if we're here in a digital design MFA, we're going to teach you how to mix pixels. That was new at the time. There was not a lot of curriculum around the idea of digital design or digital designers. Now, like every school has a digital design policy or a digital design program, I think, including Yale. There's boot camps. It's a huge thing in education now, but it wasn't when I started. So after doing education for a long time, I realized that I love education, but I hate, I love academia, but I really don't like academics. They're very sort of, I don't know, competitive people, and they're competitive about not much. So I decided to move back into programming. And so I've been a developer ever since. I'm specifically talking about a non-digital topic because I was inspired by the talk a few weeks ago by Henry Keene. I think a few of you were here, where he was talking about presentation skills. And afterwards I said, I didn't know Henry. We had the chance to work together in January with the internship program. And I really loved working with him. And I'm sorry, not in January, over the summer. And I really loved working with him, and it was a great experience. So I was psyched about his talk, but then he gave a talk about a non-digital topic. And I thought, Henry, why did you do that? And he told me that he had majored as an undergraduate in um, in psychology, and that he maybe wanted to be a psychologist one day, but instead he got into digital design. I also majored in undergraduate. I majored in political science. I was in this group of academics, like real solid academic kids, though. Like my friends would read, they'd read Goethe and they'd read Nietzsche and they'd read Kafka and Faust and the Iliad, and they understood the philosophies, and they'd all read, Plato's Republic. I thought that group of people was pretty cool. I did a lot of that reading myself, but it has had absolutely no application in my life. So I thought maybe I'd get back to some of those principles and show how they affect us today in the modern and the 21st century. So where I'm going to start in talking about desire is I'm going to start with the concept of what is real. And this is a very modern concept. And you may not be aware, but this is something that philosophy has been obsessed with since for most of the latter part of the 19th, for all of the 20th, and maybe a little bit less in the 21st century. But I think that some of it is playing out. So it all starts with Immanuel Kant. Kant wrote The Critique of Pure Reason. If you ever go to try to read it, it's long and dense, and I don't understand a word. But in there, he talked about das Ding an sich, or objective reality. So the idea of reality is we know ourselves. We have some kind of reality that occurs to all of us. And indeed, we could say that we're all sitting here in this room listening to me talk. I'm listening to me talk. I'm talking. But at what point can you experience, at what point do you actually experience that? What is the reality that's involved in that? You're listening to it through headphones. You maybe are looking at the screen, you're looking at the slide, but really you're sitting in a room somewhere, and maybe there's someone in the room with you, and maybe there's not. So we're all experiencing this in very different ways. So where do we point? Where do we put our hand on something and say, okay, this is really what's real? Kant talked about two parts of it: the phenomenon, which is the world as it appears to us, and then the nomenon, which is this das Ding an sich, or objective reality, and how that sort of can't ever be reached. Can we reach it? Can we approach it? So a lot of philosophers, some of whom we're going to talk about, took that up. And I swear this is coming back to advertising, took up that charge and ran with the idea of alienation. And if you look at the idea of alienation, it actually runs all the way through humanity. So one of the first ideas of alienation, most religions in the very first chapter of their sacred books had this idea of being cast out of the Garden of Eden. We were in paradise. The snake talked to the lady, and now we're all living outside. So there is this real concept of alienation and of being removed from reality. We're always pushed out. And yes, I think I'm actually talking. If I fall here in my room, though, no one will be here to hear it. So today we're going to talk about three types of alienation and all of these are present today. And as I talk about it, you'll be able to you will relate to all three of these. The first one is economic alienation, which was mostly talked about by Karl Marx. And we're going to talk a little bit about Marx and Marxism. The second is personal alienation, a theme brought up first by Sigmund Freud in the latter part of the 19th century and early 20th century, and then by Lacan in the middle of the 20th century, and then more recently by a philosopher called Zizek. He writes a lot of books that I don't understand, but I like reading them because it makes me feel like I have stuff to talk about. And then the third type of alienation we're going to talk about is what I call intermediary alienation, how we experience things, especially in the digital age. Again, I pointed out that you're looking at this, you're experiencing this through the internet, right? And all of us are experiencing this talk through the internet. None of you is sitting here in front of me. None of you can even really prove that I exist. So, we're going to talk about that third type of alienation, and that third type is going to be the most important of the three. And what I mean by intermediation, I actually mean disintermediation. You'll notice that the word media is in the word intermediary, and we're going to come back to why that's so. So let's start with economic isolation. So let's talk about Karl Marx for a minute. And if some of you watch the news or you're into politics, you may hear a lot of claims about Marxism and the Marxist governments are destroying the country, and Marxist policies are leading to crime and crime-riddled San Francisco and Chicago and New York. Yeah, I don't understand what that means. There are no Marxist. I cannot see any politician in the United States that I would point to and say, yeah, that person's a Marxist. So here's someone saying that, they're either stupid or lying to you or both. I'm sort of leaving out the politics from this as much as I can. But just when you hear the word Marxist, primarily what that means is left wing. I think it's become pushed over there. But Karl Marx had a lot of really interesting ideas, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute, that really profoundly affect how we think in the 20th century. Zoltan, I noticed you put up the Marx Brothers, and I will tell you how I know who Karl Marx is. When I was a kid, my mom watched a Marx Brothers movie, and she laughed the whole way through. I totally didn't get it. It was on TV, black and white. I was like, this is dumb. Why would I care about this? But then I kind of started to see why she thought it was funny. So the next day I went into school and was like, I'm going to write a report about the Marx Brothers. So I went and read a book about, like an encyclopedia type book about the Marx Brothers. And I opened it to Karl Marx and thought he was one of the Marx Brothers. That's actually a true story. And I was like, this guy isn't funny at all. I totally don't get this. So most of what we talk about when we're talking about the Marx Brothers is superstructures and substructures. Superstructures being that the base of the structure is social relations of production. How production matters to what we experience, what we own, what we buy, what we have in our house, and what we desire. We're going to come back to it. In the 20th century, especially in academia, a lot of academic groups use this Marxist idea of superstructure and substructure to define repression and to define repression of major groups. So, for instance, it was applied to Mike. I hate to stop to laugh at Marky Marx there. It was applied to account for the ideas of repression of racial minorities, of women, of different groups, and a lot of Marxist theory came out of it. So I think that when people say Marxist, this is what they're talking about. But I mean, I'm not really sure. Right now it's become this scare word. But so a lot of what you might know about Marxism is probably not Marxism. It's probably not something Karl Marx said. It's probably not something he was interested in. It's probably not something he was trying to do. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. But one thing Marx did talk about is alienation. And in fact, when it began, he mostly talked, when in the beginning of his career, at the beginning of his writing, he mostly talked about alienation. So for a long time, we lived in a pre-industrial society. And I'm going to point out to you that we think this is a long time ago, but actually really it kind of wasn't. And whenever I want to think about how long something is, I think backwards from where I am now. So let me give you this example. If you're born in 1990 and you're now 90, you'd now be 33 years old, right? Yes, I think so. Go backwards 33 years from 1990. So 33, if you're 33, you're a young person. Your life hasn't gone that long. It's not much of humanity, but go backwards in time and you're in 1957. And that sounds like ancient times, doesn't it? We're really unaware of how fast time moves. I mean, it feels to us like time, and you've heard time is relative. I can tell you for sure that since I had a kid, time has changed completely. I am certain I am experiencing time in a completely different way than he is. That's a physics conversation. I'm not going to get into it here, but it's not that long that we have been away from pre-industry. So, I mean, it's not even, let's say, 200 years. The internet, and by which I specifically mean the web, has only been around for maybe 30 years. Google has only been around for 25 years. We feel like this stuff has been going on forever, but it truly hasn't. And not that long ago, we were living in pre-industrial societies. And here they show this beautiful pre-industrial society, and everyone's come out and they're under the tree and they're singing songs and they're having a meal together. Believe me when I tell you, it probably sucked. It was dirty. Life was nasty, brutish, and short. People did not live that long. They had to work all day. It wasn't fun. But in pre-industrial society, we were directly connected with our labor. If I went out and harvested wheat all day, I was going to have something to eat. I was going to take that wheat. I was going to know how to pound it into bread. I was going to make it for dinner. If I needed clothes, I would go out. I would shear the sheep. I would have the wool, I would press the wool, and that was going to be my sweater. If I didn't know how to do that, or if I didn't see a scale in doing that, I would go to my neighbor. So there was a very, and maybe they would trade me wheat for bread. There was a very one-to-one relationship between people and their labor. It was locked in. Like, you worked with your hands, you got something out of it. There was none of this arbitrary whatever it is we do today. In fact, I've worked on a lot of applications, for instance, that I've never seen or used in the wild, right? We all have that story. So the other part of that I want to talk about is, for most of pre-industrial society, and even to some extent in post-industrial society, we were gods, and everything that we did was explained by what we saw out in the universe, right? So, you looked out, you saw the stars at night, and that meant that there were gods in the sky. They were twinkling, they were living above us. We now know we have rocket ships and telescopes and all that. We now know that none of that is true, but we really lived very close to nature. People mostly didn't have clocks. You didn't have a phone in your pocket. You had to, you knew what time of year it was by how it felt. Maybe you were lucky enough to be with someone and, you had a vague idea of the time by the calendar. What I always wonder about those times is, how did people meet? Because if someone's like, oh, I'm going to come see you, and I live in Boston and you live in Atlanta, I'm gonna get up and take a walk. So I wrote you a letter, and then I guess I start walking. I don't know how that works. So I'll be there sometime between March 27th and April 9th. I really wonder how people could even figure that out. But we had a really, really close relationship with nature. So a lot of what happens with alienation, and a lot of what happens in the post-industrial society, and Marx was one of the first people to realize this, is it's not like that anymore. We're alienated from our labor. We're alienated from the things that we make. We make things that we don't own. We make things that we don't use. And so the relationship between between labor and product begins to bifurcate, and things become more and more and more abstract. And this if you ever gone to how many of you have actually slaughtered a chicken and then eaten it besides Daniela? Probably none of us. So you go to the store and there's a selection of things there. If you look at it, it's really a ridiculous amount of selection. Every time I go in to look at the store and I go to look at cereal, we eat the same cereal, whatever brand we pick. It's usually some form of Cheerios. But there's like 90 selections of Cheerios. I mean, do we really need that? So in all of this, we're really very, very, very isolated from even the things that keep us alive. We're isolated from each other. We're isolated from what makes us tick. We're isolated from a lot of it. Renee, you posted "Time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana." It's attributed to Groucho Marx. So that's really, I think it's really, really apropos to this conversation. So if you haven't heard that phrase before, it's actually quite linguists love that phrase. So let's come back to Karl Marx too. So this is some of what I wanted to come back to. And the problem these days, so Karl Marx was kind of onto something, and his idea was that there was going to be this great revolution. The workers would rise up, and as such, the workers would come to take over the means of production. We were going to take it back from the capitalists. We were going to make it our own thing, and we were not going to toil under this oppression of being disconnected from our labor. How do you think that worked out? I'm going to guess you're going to say that it didn't, because if it did, I wouldn't be able to stand here and give this talk. One of the largest problems, I think, of what happened with Marxism was that it was tried in what was then known as the Soviet Union. And Lenin and Stalin had some very interesting ideas about Marx's ideas, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I mean, they were murderous. And Stalin killed more people than Hitler, and it was terrible. And it led to, we had wars and the Cold War and all this stuff. Again, we're not really here to talk about history, but as such, Marx really has become a sort of bad word. But Marx probably would not have approved of what Stalin and Lenin did. And but you have to kind of look at like what a hold he had on the modern mind, because we still are arguing about whether or not Marx was right. And I think some of the reason we still argue about it is because maybe we don't entirely agree that he was wrong. how many people, I mean, I'd really like you to raise your hands. You know that we're all being asked to go to work. How many people are psyched to go back to work? To go back into the office physically? So hit raise if that's you. Hit the raise button. Right. So I'm not seeing anybody hit that. So there is still this, and if you look at what's going on right now with the consolidation of the media industries, especially around the idea of streaming media. Like streaming media, when it first came out, it was great. The first time you saw a video on the computer, like, this is revolutionary. This changes everything. And now we're like dropping services, right? Or like YouTube has started to show commercials every 5 minutes. All of these media companies have consolidated, but if you can look at this, none of the media companies have made a profit, and they're really kind of going back to the cable model, aren't they? I mean, like, what happened to the revolution we were promised? So what's happening now is all the fees have come back, and even if you owned every single streaming service, even if you owned Hulu and you owned Netflix and you owned Amazon and you owned Apple TV, you still would not have access to as many titles as you could have walked into any Blockbuster in 1995 and checked out on DVD. So I think that this whole like capitalism versus the people thing is real. I think it's going to start playing out in the next few years, especially as global climate change begins to take over. But and the other thing that tells me that we should keep thinking about Marx is because I think that capitalism is afraid of Marx. But what I say about Marx is, and I'm not a Marxist. If I was a Marxist, I wouldn't be standing here talking to you, because there's no way I'd be working at Publicis and making websites for corporations, right? So there's no way on earth I'm a Marxist. But and why should we be afraid of Marx? A dangerous economist is still an economist, right? Have you seen Paul Krugman? Like, we could all beat that guy up. I also don't understand why Marx would be seen as more dangerous to capitalism than Keynes or Adam Smith or John Kenneth Galbraith. But like, you sure hear a lot of people going like, "Oh, we don't want to become Marxist." So it might be worth, maybe, if you haven't read any Marx, I mean, you could pick up like the Cliff Notes on the Communist Manifesto. Maybe he had some good ideas. I don't know. We're not here to talk about Marx, but I hope what you're coming away with is Marx was the first one to realize that we are definitely, the Industrial Revolution alienates us from the products of our labor. Let's go to the second type of alienation I want to talk about, and that's personal isolation. And this is one that we all will have examples of. So Sigmund Freud was the first, and if you know any, or you study, maybe you took an intro to psych class. I mean, everybody gets in it with Freud. Freud's whole thing about tell me about your mother, and everything is about your mother. And Freud was the first to identify that there were symbols, well, not the first, but one of the first to realize that there were symbols that we all react to, and that we have this kind of shared understanding of humanity. A lot of that was taken up more by his follower, Jung. But this idea that we're sort of all in this common shared humanity, and that what happens with psychological problems is our alienation from that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that alienation. Freud was the first to make that a sort of a big deal, and is the father of modern psychology. And if you think you don't need a psychologist, or you've never been to a psychologist, so much of what we do in modern life is affected by psychology, is affected by if you talk about safe spaces, if you talk about how people need to be treated at work, if you talk about work-life balance, all of those things, that all just is just, you can draw a straight line from there to Freud. Is psychiatry objective? I don't know. I mean, can you really objectively prove that dreams analysis? I mean, any algorithm you write, I can like do big O notation. I can tell you how to improve it. But I think it's hilarious that there's someone in this chat that has no idea that she's there, and it proves that my plan is working. So is it objective? I don't know. Can you really prove that psychiatry is true? I don't know. One thing to keep in mind is that psychiatry predates modern medicine. So Freud, for instance, thought that, so you have to kind of take what Freud and then later Lacan says with a grain of salt. So Freud, so when I say predates modern medicine, that includes psychotropic drugs, that includes the MRI, that includes the CAT scan. So he thought, for instance, that schizophrenia was caused because an individual was alienated from his mother, like his mother didn't love him enough, basically. But we now know, because we have MRIs, that schizophrenia is actually a type of brain malformation that happens. It's got nothing to do with your mother. Your mother could love you, like I love ice cream, and you could still develop schizophrenia. So again, you have to take him with a grain of truth. Daniela asked if Freud was debunked, and I mean, I don't know what I'd say about debunked, because a lot of what he thought is still present in modern psychiatry. But you can't get, for instance, if you look at it's called analysis type of psychiatry, which is usually depicted by a guy laying on a couch with a psychiatrist as a clipboard, and he's sitting there taking notes while he talks to him. He's not facing him. They're not facing each other. He begins every session with, "Tell me about your childhood." You can't get, if you go, there are those analysts still exist, but if you go to see them, you cannot get reimbursed by health insurance companies. So he's generally, that form of psychiatry is generally no longer widely accepted, but it does underpin a lot of what we know these days about psychiatry. I had to throw these two guys in here, Kafka, Borges. The reason I had to throw them in here is because they both wrote very effectively about alienation. I do have to say that I can't really go off on them for too long, because they're quite side points. But if you've ever read Kafka, especially some of the short stories, which are great, In the Penal Colony, The Metamorphosis, others, he wrote so many stories, but they're wonderful because he truly talks about isolation in modern society. So Freud wrote in the early part of the 20th century. He writes a lot of stories about a character that's asked to do a task, but then no matter what he tries to do, he can't complete that task. He is asked in the castle, he's asked to report to the castle, and he goes to the castle door and they say, "Well, you're not supposed to come today, you're supposed to come tomorrow." And he can't get to the castle, and he can't figure out why he has to go in the castle, etc. In the trial, he's summoned to complete a task. He's told that he's been committed of a crime. He's welcome to defend himself. But then when he goes to try to defend himself, he comes across this increasingly arduous series of tasks and confusions, and I think it's a great book. So a lot of people say, well, that's modern bureaucracy. I mean, maybe. I think that's a sort of general condition of frustration that we all feel, right? I mean, we've all had a ticket that you can't close. So if you want to read somebody who's written very convincingly about that sort of frustration and alienation from feeling a completion or feeling fulfillment, Kafka's your guy. You don't have to read the long story. You can read the shorter ones. Borges writes just like Kafka. He's done an amazing job also in covering some of this stuff. I could mention Walter Benjamin, Theodor Adorno, other Frankfurt School writers, Hannah Arendt, Martin Heidegger, who started out as in a relationship with Hannah Arendt, who was Jewish and defined the concept of totalitarianism. He later became a Nazi post-war, blah, blah, blah. But that's beyond the scope of this talk. Just had to shout out to my man, Franz K. So that takes us to Jacques Lacan. Jacques Lacan was a psychoanalyst, or he was a psychiatrist. I guess he was an academic. He was a post-war reader of history. So you have to keep in mind what a massive smack on the American imagination, a massive game, or I don't know, a massive hold of the American imagination, and actually I should say global imagination, that came out of World War I, which we thought was going to be the war to end all wars, but then World War II, which killed even more people. A lot of people died. Everybody knew somebody who died. We dropped atomic bombs for the first time. Europe was leveled. Russia destroyed Germany. We now had the post-war era. And I mean, a lot of it really, really changed a lot of people's thoughts of thinking, people's ways of thinking about the world. And could we trust anything? And had humanity lost its collective mind, came up with the idea of war crimes, came up with the idea of genocide. I mean, a lot of good things came out of it, but mostly bad things. And into this comes a lot of post-war theory. And some of that is what I was talking about a little bit ago with structuralism and structuralists, and we're going to get into that. But Lacan was very influential in this period, and a lot of Lacan and people like him and their thoughts about symbols and symbology, which I'm going to come back to in just a moment, they further delved into this idea of alienation, right? So you could be someone in society, and I mean, literally, like in 1935, you could have been a member of a rich family and you were going to school every day and you had a coat and you had clothes and you were well fed. In 1945, your entire family's dead. Your home has been burned to the ground. You haven't eaten in months. You're waiting for the Allies to come liberate you, whatever. All of your treasure and fortune are gone. You're praying you can get to America or England to save yourself. So it really sort of knocked humanity for a wallop, and people began to think very differently about being a human being. It changed a lot of what we had to think about, not only human beings, but what was happening to us with technology, right? Technology had just killed so many people, tanks and bombs and guns and nuclear bombs and airplanes, and it was terrible. Is this the future? A lot of sort of what you now think of as dystopian literature comes out of this. A lot of very positive thinking comes out of this, like maybe we can move on from this and accept humanity. But Lacan was a very primary thinker in sort of thinking about some of this alienation. There's also Zizek, who is modern. He's alive today. He's still writing. He's still active. I kind of don't really want to get into Zizek, but if you want to pick up some Zizek, look at The Sublime Object of Ideology. He nails it. I mean, he's a very interesting critic of modern society. Probably you could watch a couple of YouTube videos about him. I don't think you really need to get into him so deeply. So where does the idea of modern alienation comes from? And this starts from Freud. So the very first idea of alienation starts with this: you're a baby and there's your mother. And that's your whole world. You're a baby and you have your mother, and you're a baby and you have your mother, and that's it. Your mom loves you, you love your mom smiles at you smile at your mom feeds you, your mom clothes you, your mom hugs you. But then one day you look in a mirror and you realize that you're a separate entity. The baby looks in a mirror and goes, wait a minute, is that me? That's me. Wait, mom and I aren't one thing. There's two of us. And then along comes dad. And then along comes your sister or your brother. And you realize that mom doesn't only interact with you. Mom also interacts with dad. Mom also interacts with your sister and brother. Mom also interacts with the stove or the dog or the garage or the car, and you're alienated, right? I mean, you had this bond. The bond was you and mom. That was your whole world. You were one entity, but now you're not. You're pulled out of the Garden and you can never get back to it. Mom loves dad too. You have to share mom with dad. So much has been written about that, Oedipus, and I mean that goes back to the ancients. But now you also have to share mom with your sister, and you have to share mom with and then you have to share mom with society. Mom has to go to work, and oh my gosh, I'm so alienated. And you can never get back to that original connection you had with mom. One more thing I want to bring up in making this point is Alfred Hitchcock's MacGuffin. Again, another show of hands, if you wouldn't mind all clicking raise. Do people know about the MacGuffin? Do any of you know what a MacGuffin is? Would anyone like to give an explanation?
Isn't a MacGuffin something that is introduced into a story at the last minute to sort of tie up a story? Maybe I'm oversimplifying, but something like that. Am I wrong?
You're awfully close. Allison, did you have an answer?
Just a mysterious kind of unexplainable thing. Kind of what I got.
You're both incredibly close. What the MacGuffin is, and this was a term coined by Alfred Hitchcock. The MacGuffin is an object that moves the plot along. If you watch Hitchcock movies, and if you've never seen a Hitchcock movie, I recommend watching some, and you almost can't pick a bad one. And look out for Hitchcock because he shows up in all his movies. The ego. But a MacGuffin is the thing that moves the movie along. So this came up, actually, believe it or not, in a meeting earlier today. How many of you have watched Suits, which became huge during the recent writer's strike? Quick show of hands. Or I was trying to think of an example to give that most people here would have, something most of us would have seen. But I thought of Suits because Suits is loaded with MacGuffins. So in every single episode of Suits, there's always so I'm sorry, I did a bad job of explaining what the MacGuffin is. So the MacGuffin is something that's in a movie that drives the plot along, But when you really come down to it at the end of the day, does it really exist? So an example I'll give is if you've seen the Hitchcock movie, what is it, The 39 Steps? There's these airplane plans that are going to be stolen. You never see the airplane plans. You don't even know the airplane plans exist, but they drive the plot along because everybody is responding to like, oh no, so and so's got the plans, and oh, if we don't do this, they're going to get the plans, and we have to save the plans, and we have to protect the plans. But you never actually see the plans. If you watch Suits, every episode of Suits, right? Someone's got to make partner. Someone's got to be a named partner. Someone's going to make senior partner. Someone's going to lose junior partner. There's all these things that happen to these people. But I mean, do they really matter? And I think if you look at it, like, does it matter? I mean, you don't really feel that kind of thing. Do you know if it matters if you're a junior or senior partner? I mean, it sounds like it's important, but honestly, you don't know. So what a MacGuffin is it's an object of desire. It's an object that the characters desire. It's the object that the characters want to obtain or have and want to keep other people from obtaining, or have and want to get rid of, whatever it is. But usually when you look at these objects themselves, you don't really understand what the true value of them is. Other examples have come up in Monty Python, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? They're going for the Lost Ark, but I mean, and you're told like, oh, it's the ancient Ark of the Hebrews, but it doesn't really. I mean, I guess in the end it wipes out all the Nazis, but it doesn't really exist. And so this is what Lacan would have called, and my French sucks, but the objet petit a, the lowercase a object, and it's the object of desire. And when you talk about desire, all of us have this same object of desire, right? We have these things that we want. We want more money. We want more fame. We want a promotion at work. We want bigger houses, whatever it is. And so this is desire that's created with us. And Lacan called this the object petit a, but we're alienated from this desire, right? We can never truly obtain it. And I'm going to come back to that idea in a minute. So if you think about what you really want, and you think about that in context of Kant's objective reality, do you really know what you want? And so I'm glad you posted the Star Wars reference, because you're in a Kobayashi Maru. You're in this kind of paradoxical existence of like never being able to attain what you want, and even like maybe never being able to truly know what you want. And maybe the only things that you want are the things that you're told you want, which is kind of the object of capitalism, is to get you to buy more and more stuff that you're disconnected from. So I'm sorry, I said Star Wars. I did mean Star Trek. I'm glad that the Star Trek thing came up there. I'm talking a mile a minute, but Star Trek, the Kobayashi Maru is a Star Trek botline. It's actually a Star Trek MacGuffin. And so you're kind of in this idea where like the beatings will continue until morale improves, right? Your morale is poor because of the beatings, but you're being beat to improve your morale. It's not exactly the kindest thing I could have said, but it's more or less what Zizek and Lacan said about object petit a, is it's this thing that it's unobtainable, and you're in this paradox of even trying to obtain it, because every time you get close to it, you're ripped away from it, and so it kind of lets you down every time. Does that sound like something you experience in the modern world? Think about that for a second, because I'm coming back to it. The third type of isolation, does anyone have any questions? I know I've been talking a mile a minute. Does anyone have questions about what I'm talking about isolation, either economic or personal? Does it kind of resonate with you? You should all feel this on some level, is what I'm hoping. If anyone has a question, please just grab the mic. Okay, I'm going to keep talking. So now the third type of isolation I'm going to get to is disintermediation. And that's the kind that we are most involved with as people who are developers and internet developers. So can you spot the dog in this image? So is the dog the signified, and this is what Lacan talks a lot about, and semiotics, the whole field of semiotics. Fun fact about semiotics, it's one of the few fields that was invented twice. It was huge in the early part of the 19th century, and then the later part of the 19th century, the early part of the 20th century. And then everything that the semioticians were working on then was completely lost to history. It was seen as pointless, it was abandoned, and then it was reinvented again in the 50s. But the people in the 50s, by Noam Chomsky and some others, but the people who worked on it in the 50s had no communication with the people who worked on it in the 20s. So they actually ended up reinventing the whole thing again. And a lot of what ended up happening was that that was realized later that a lot of the conclusions that had earlier been made had been later made. So semiotics gives this kind of idea about signs, signifiers, and signs. So you have a signified, which is the dog. You have a signifier, which is the word dog. And then you have a sign, which conflates signified and signifier into the idea of the dog. Which one of these is the real dog? Well, you could say that's the real dog in the picture, or that's the real dog in the word, or this isn't a real dog because it's a picture of a dog, or Dave is stupid and none of this is a dog, or whatever, right? You get what I'm saying? So this should give you a good sense of the isolation and what Kant was talking about with the noumenon is you can't really ever know what the dog is, right? I mean, because if you say it's this, I can say it's that. You might see the sign this way. I might see it's that way. You might say the signified is the sign is the signifier. This was actually a serious attempt to understand language, but it has been used to say that this is actually a way in which we're isolated from language. Rene, you nailed it. Next slide. This was a famous painting by Rene Magritte. It says, "Ceci n'est pas un pipe," meaning this is not a pipe. But is it a pipe? He painted the pipe. He says it's not a pipe. Is it a pipe or isn't it a pipe? It looks like a pipe to me, but you can't smoke this pipe. And so he was doing this to show the treachery of images. And thank you so much for posting that very link. This is not a pipe, but it is a pipe, and you're alienated, right? You are completely alienated. You can't reach out and grab this object even if you wanted to. But at the same time, if we were to have, Dustin, that was hilarious. If we were to have a conversation about this, I mean, you can say, well, that's not a pipe, and then what are we even talking about, right? We quickly go over into gibberish, which I think was Magritte's point, is we can't sit there and say that nothing exists. We can't sit there and say this isn't happening. It is. It's right in front of us. It's a pipe. The other part of disintermediation that I want to point out to you that Magritte didn't know and couldn't have anticipated is you're looking at this on a digital slide that is residing on a server somewhere that you've never seen. Maybe you've never seen me. Maybe you've never been in a meeting with me before. You're hearing my voice. I could be a ChatGPT bot. You know, we're so disintermediated from this pipe. Was Magritte looking at a pipe when he painted this? Does Magritte know what a pipe looks like? Did Magritte even exist? Is this reality? It's really hard to tell, right? We're really, really, really separated from the reality of this images. I'm going to go so far as to tell you, and this is all true, I swore that I had seen this painting in person. I was so sure of it when I got the idea of giving this talk. And then I kind of looked into it and was like, looked at all the places that this painting has ever been. I've never seen this painting, but I've seen it so many times. I was so sure that I had. I was convinced. I was like, oh yeah, I saw that when I was in. Nope, never saw it. So we're vastly, vastly, vastly separated from the reality of what something is. So that brings us to a thinker. This was in the latter part of the 20th century, named I think Rene Baudrillard. And whenever you don't know this guy's first name, they're all easy to Jacques or Rene. It's just a good thing to say. So I'm not going to really read through this, but you can look at the left side and see that that's 4 very different representations of a sponge. Baudrillard's primary point was about, or not one of his primary points, was about the difference between a simulation and a simulacra. And one thing that he posited was that the Gulf War never happened. And the reason that he Rene, you're right. The smartest people are. Just as soon as I said that, I was like, we have a Rene in the room, don't we? Whenever you don't know the name of a famous French scholar, just say his first name was Dave. So this was Dave Baudrillard, and he posited that the Gulf War never happened because it was the first war that we ever had that was globally televised. But who actually experienced it? Did anybody? I mean, I don't want to. I'm saying what Baudrillard said. I don't want to downplay the very real damage of the people that were hurt. It was 100 hours war. People were obviously there and were hurt, were injured, were killed. Vets came back to the United States with terrible injuries, and some of them are still suffering to this day. I'm not trying to downplay any of that, but Baudrillard's point was, for most Americans, this was not something that we actually experienced. We saw it on TV. This guy got up. You say he's a general. Is he a general? I don't know. I've never met him. I've never seen him fight. He's pointing to a television that is interestingly watermarked Getty Images. Look at that. I did not notice that before I was giving this talk. But television is even watermark getting images. So what in here is real? It's really hard to know. Allison, that is hilarious. Is exactly right. Like the people that say that the moon landing never happened, it's the exact same thing. Like, who experienced it? Have you been to the moon? I haven't been to the moon. Do we know that that happened? It was shown on TV, but you weren't there, right? So what is reality? And we're alienated from the truth. There's a lot of talk about the average person, right? You pick up the news or you pick up whatever paper, oh, the average person, the average person. But the average person doesn't exist. You cannot go somewhere and open a door and there's the average person. So everything that's represented by statistics, there's not a single thing. It's represented by a group of things or a trend in a group of things. And you can't go and like say, okay, this is the two, they say that the average American has 2.2 children, but you can't go and like visit that 0.2 child. Who even is this? Does anyone know who this is? Does anyone recognize this person?
Are we allowed to speak about this guy anymore?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, that's perfect. It's Bill Cosby. I don't think my son knows who Bill Cosby really is. This is Bill Cosby on the Family Guy. Griffin, you're exactly correct. What it really is a parody of Bill Cosby on Family Guy. We don't even speak about Bill Cosby anymore, right? Because he committed all these horrible, terrible crimes. He's kind of persona non grata. But when I was a kid, Bill Cosby, when I was a kid, Bill Cosby was a huge celebrity. He was massive. But now the way that most people experience Bill Cosby is in a caricature of Bill Cosby on Family Guy. So I was walking around the house the other day doing the Bill Cosby, pretending like I was Bill Cosby back in the Cosby Show to get my son to clean up the house. And I said, do you even know who Bill Cosby is? He goes, yeah, I saw him on the Family Guy. So think about how disintermediated my son, who knows who Bill Cosby is from Bill Cosby, right? He has this sort of strange and jokey idea of who Bill Cosby even is. He doesn't know. So again, more and more and more, this disintermediation and this alienation. So I'm going to come back to how this affects us, and let me start talking about that a little bit. And I'm going a little over on time, but I'm going to start talking a lot faster than I already am, which seems impossible. What do game shows and advice columns have in common? And the thing that they have in common is they make us feel smart, right? You watch Jeopardy, you watch Wheel of Fortune, you watch something like, I don't know, The Price is Right or Family Feud. You can always get the answers, right? You always know the answers. How come that idiot is sitting right there and can't figure this out? Why do you read advice columns? Because how come this dad doesn't know what to do about the pet monkey? I found these old school advice columns, but the reason what draws us to these is we feel that we're better than these people, right? Don't we? You don't really, but you're sitting in your living room couch. There was a really interesting thing where what was it? Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? I was watching that show when it was big with Regis Philbin, and one of the people, it was a celebrity, they had a celebrity version, and one of the celebrities came on and said, this game is really easy when you're sitting at home watching it, but when you're sitting here in the chair with the lights flying around, it's impossible. But we don't care about that. So what do game shows and advice columnists have in common is they make us feel smart, and people go back to these and they watch them for this reason, like, oh, well, that word is obviously talking or boxing or whatever, right? But you're not actually doing that. You're not actually winning money. As far as you know, you're not really actually even smarter than any of these people, but you feel like you are, right? So you get this kind of false smartness. Video games are another thing where you can put yourself in a video game, and especially with VR, and you can be this big tough guy. You can save the world. You can save the president. You can become the president. You can. The other thing I wanted to put in here is video game ads. And if you play online games, you notice a lot of the ads for other online games, they're always like way better than the game. Have you noticed that? Like they always make the ad, the ad is this great game. And you're like, yeah, I totally play that game. And you go and you download the game and the game sucks. I get that that's advertising in general. But the other thing is in the game ads, they always do the person that's simulating the game never plays as well as you would, right? So it's back to this model of like you're better than that person, and it creates the desire for you to go in and play that game because you'll do better than the person on the advertising is doing, right? So let's get to the click, or what Lacan would have called jouissance. Jouissance is the pleasure. It's the moment at which you get the pleasure from your desire. And the problem with jouissance is it's unattainable. You can never really get all the way there. And again, if you have read any Lacan and you want to say, I'm vastly oversimplifying this, I am, but that's the basic idea. Okay, does everyone get that? It's the thing that you want, but the minute you get it, you don't want it anymore. So do any of these questions, I'm just going to skip this slide, we just don't have time for it. I think you get the idea of why I put this slide here. This is Zeno's paradox. It's the idea that you can never actually reach anything because every time you go, you're cutting your distance in half. So you go halfway to the goal and then a quarter and then an eighth and then a 16th, but you never actually reach it, right? Because you're always just cutting that distance in half. So I'm always like some infinitesimal distance from it, but I never can actually reach it. That's the paradox. So let's look at advertising. Are you everything that you've ever hoped to be? And the answer is probably no. It's very hard to be fulfilled in modern society. So when you look at a piece of advertising like beech nut gum, what is a beech nut? You never stop to think about it. I don't know. But look at these impossible people, right? Their hair is perfect, even though they're dancing, their hair's not even moving. That guy's got that starched collar out. That woman's waist is so small, I think she should go to an emergency room. But, advertising always shows us these perfect people, right? It always puts in front of us this idea of attainment, of trying to meet our desires. And it always puts in front of us this idea that if we just chew beech nut gum, we'll be able to be like, the sexy dancers at the hoedown, and that's something to be desired. Now, the question is, do we desire that because we see it in the ad, or do we see it in the ad because we desire it? Right. And again, there's some alienation and some paradoxes involved there. Coca-Cola is a great example. And I was planning originally to talk about this quite a bit, but I'm not going to because we're very close on time. But you can just totally see these ads are dripping with desire, especially the one on the left. I mean, what does yes mean? Does yes mean you want the Coca-Cola? Or is she saying yes to someone else? Like perhaps we can go for ice cream after the sock hop. And on the right too, the desire that's built around Coke, and Coke has been not only desire, but goes out to an international version of America. And I was planning to talk about this a lot more, but this talk has gone on longer than I thought. I was going to talk about the McRib for the same reason. So let's get over to clickbait. What is your brain on clickbait, right? It's pure desire. You see something like 5 incredible facts about Joe Biden that you've never known. You're like, wow, I'm interested in Joe Biden. I want to hear those 5 incredible facts. And you're like, I'm going to click, right? And so you go from, I think this graphic puts it perfectly, intrigued to excited to disappointed to angry to depressed, right? Because you click it and it's like, what are the 5 interesting things? He was born in Pennsylvania and he likes pancakes with his breakfast, and right. And so you're like, oh, well, that sucked. Why did I even click that? Until you see the next piece of clickbait. Here's 10 great things about I'm having trouble thinking of celebrities today. But here's 10 great things you didn't know about Kendrick Lamar, right? And you're going to click it, and you're going to click it, and you're going to click it. And you see this stuff at the bottom of every news site these days. You go through the whole news, you go through all the articles, especially in the alternative journalism sites. You go through all the articles, but then you get to the bottom, and there's always one there that's like, 8 weird facts about World War II. But so there's that desire, right? It creates that desire from you, but you're alienated from that desire the minute you click, right? And so you can never really get the desire that you want, but advertising can hold it out in front of you. So what exactly does drive that click? Is it want? Is it a need? Is it curiosity? Or is it desire? And with that, I'm going to open it up to the floor.
Dave, this was awesome. This is the last thing I expected to be talking about today, and I gotta say it was great.
Well, thank you.
And I find these types of conversations extremely interesting, and something that I think we can all relate to, because everyone in this room is intelligent. They do their job every day at a high performing level. They do all and many other things. They have hobbies, they have interest, family. There's a lot of things they do really well, but no one is immune to these kind of underlying things that affect you on a day-to-day basis. I don't know who here, when they go to buy something, they're like, oh, I need a Snuggie. Cold, I need a Snuggie. I have a blanket, but I need one with little armholes in it, so I need to buy a Snuggie. For me, I'll put that in my shopping cart and let it sit for a bit. And then probably like 20 minutes later, I'm like, I don't need a Snuggie. My blanket will be just fine. But I find it interesting, like you'll kind of convince yourself you need something even though you don't. And when the Amazon package arrives at your door, you look at it and you're like, heck did I buy this? How could I have been the person to buy this? I'm smart or XYZ. And you're just like, how did they get me on this Snuggie or whatever you bought? I find that like it's fascinating, and it's something that, even if you're rationally minded or irrationally minded, it doesn't really matter. You have to like constantly like assess from almost an outside perspective of your own behaviors and be like, does that make sense? Do I need this? Do I need to do that thing? Do I need to talk to that person? Do I need to do all this stuff? I don't know. It's fascinating. So I've really, really enjoyed kind of hearing a lot of the story behind it.
And so the piece of it I
go
hope
ahead.
you captured though is this is the business we're in. We're not just responding to this, we're creating this on our end. So it's both sides of that. It is, yeah, like why did I click that? But it's also how do we get people to click? So it's again another paradox. It kind of is this like Mobius strip or infinity sign that just keeps circling around all of us, especially in this business.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because even from, a development standpoint, when you're working with a client, they're building out a component and you say like, oh, I see you want like a button here. Why doesn't that whole card component capture the click? It makes it easier. It makes it easier. It makes the experience better. The experience of getting you to check out with that item in your cart at a faster rate. So it's even something that like we improve selling, and I guess that's why we all have jobs. We make it easier for companies to make money, but it is interesting.
Yep, exactly. And thank you, Mike. I appreciate that comment. Does anyone else? I know we're over time. Does anyone else have anything they want to talk about? I also left a sort of Easter egg in here, the save button with the floppy disk. If you want to discuss that, but yeah. If anyone else has comments, I would love to hear what people have to say. I am definitely done talking. Well, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. I hope I've given you something to think about. I had a lot more stuff to say in some of these slides. I wasn't able to get into the sort of meat of it, which was going to come with the McRib, no pun intended, and how it actually affects us as advertisers. But I think I got most of my point across. So I hope it's giving you something to think about when you're doing your jobs. Don't be unaware of these forces at work and the things you're putting together because they're right there, and you yourself are responding to them all the time.
This was great. Thank you again, Dave, for taking some time. I would absolutely love a follow-up on this. This has definitely been, I think, probably my favorite presentation. And I think I've been leading these meetings for coming up on 2 years now, but this is awesome. Like just kind of a lot, really, really good brain food. And it's something that's probably thinking about this, in the coming weeks.
As we head into Christmas.
Yes.
Again, thank you all. Thank you all. I will hopefully see or talk to you all again very soon.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for everyone joining. Thanks for your presentation, Dave. Really appreciate it. I know how much time it takes to put these together, and it's a lot of effort, a lot of thinking, a lot of time speaking. So really do appreciate it. We don't have anything scheduled for November. If anyone is interested in speaking, you have a long runway, like at least a month and a half if you want to talk on a topic. And I'm really like, I really enjoyed this. And if you have something that is adjacent to our industry or adjacent to technology or even something unrelated, just message me. And if there's something really cool you want to talk about, I'm sure we'd all be happy to hear about it. So thanks again. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Talk soon.
Thanks.